Rain hit the windshield in fast, uneven bursts, and Mercy Calloway leaned forward over the wheel of her delivery van, squinting past the wipers at a stretch of road she had driven 100 times and had never once seen empty like this. No headlights behind her, no headlights ahead, just the wet shine of streetlight on asphalt and the hollow drum of water against metal. She had 4 more stops before midnight, and a rent payment due in 6 days that her bank account could not currently cover, and neither of those facts left much room in her head for anything else. That was why the man standing at the curb almost did not register at first. A dark shape between 2 parked cars, one hand raised, not waving so much as testing whether the rain had made him invisible. Her dispatcher, Ronnie, had already texted twice about the delay, the kind of clipped, all-caps messages that meant he was standing in the warehouse doorway watching the clock instead of doing his own job. And Mercy had learned months ago that answering him mid-route only slowed her down further. She had learned to carry most things that way lately, quietly, without asking anyone to make it easier. Ever since her last roommate had walked out, owing her 4 months of shared bills, and Mercy had spent the following year rebuilding a version of stability that did not depend on trusting another person to hold up their half of anything. She slowed without deciding to. It was a habit older than she liked to admit, the instinct to stop for anyone who looked stranded, a habit that had cost her more than once, and that she had promised herself, after the last time, she would finally unlearn. She did not unlearn it tonight. She eased the van toward the curb and rolled the window down 4 inches, just enough to speak through, water immediately finding the gap and running cold down her wrist. "You okay?" she called out. The man stepped closer, and the streetlight caught him properly for the first time. He was tall, dressed in a suit that had been expensive before the rain ruined the line of it. Dark hair plastered flat against his forehead, and there was something in the way he held himself, upright even now, that did not match the lost look on his face. His eyes moved past her, down the street behind the van, then back to her, quick and searching, like a man checking an exit before he answered a question. "My car broke down a few blocks from here," he said. "My phone is dead. I don't know this neighborhood." It was a reasonable story. It was also, Mercy would understand much later, not quite a lie, and not quite the truth. The kind of sentence built to survive exactly this amount of scrutiny, and no more. In the moment, soaked and cold and 20 minutes behind schedule, she only heard a stranger asking for help on a night when the whole street looked like it had been emptied out on purpose. "I can't take you far," she said. "I've got deliveries, but I can get you to the gas station on Halstead. They've got a phone you can use." "That would be enough," he said, and something in his shoulders eased, though his eyes did not stop moving. She unlocked the passenger door, and he folded himself into the seat with the careful economy of someone used to expensive cars, not delivery vans with a crack running the length of the dashboard and a cardboard tree air freshener that had stopped smelling like anything months ago. Up close, the rain had not fully hidden what the suit was, the weight of the fabric, the stitching at the cuff, and Mercy felt the first small prickle of a question she did not yet have the shape for. "I'm Mercy," she offered, pulling back into the empty street. "Damien," he said, and offered nothing else. Not a last name, not the kind of small talk most people filled silence with. He kept glancing at the side mirror instead of at her, and twice his hand moved toward his jacket pocket and stopped, like he was checking for a phone he had already told her was dead. "You said you don't know this neighborhood," she said, mostly to fill the quiet. "But you knew to wait right there. That's not exactly a spot people wander into by accident." His eyes flicked to her, sharper than the question deserved. "Lucky guess," he said. It looked like a road that led somewhere. It was a strange answer, and she almost said so. But headlights swept into the mirror behind them just then. A car pulling out from a side street 2 blocks back, moving slow, matching her speed instead of passing. Damien's whole body went still in a way that had nothing to do with cold. "Take the next left," he said, no longer sounding lost at all. "The gas station's straight ahead." "Take the left," he said again, quieter, and something in his voice made her hands turn the wheel before her brain had finished deciding to trust him. The car behind them did not turn. It kept going straight, taillights shrinking into the rain, and Mercy felt foolish and shaken in equal measure, gripping the wheel a little too hard as her pulse settled back down. "Sorry," Damien said, and for the first time he sounded almost like he meant it. "It's been a long night." "You want to tell me what kind of long night makes a person flinch at a car that didn't even slow down?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the road, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something lower, more careful. If you take me home tonight, you need to understand you can never mention this street again. Not to anyone. Not as a story. Not as something strange that happened to you once. Mercy laughed before she could stop herself. A short, disbelieving sound. That's a very dramatic thing to say about a broken-down car. He did not laugh. He looked at her, and there was nothing performed in his expression at all. Only a kind of tired, focused honesty that made the joke curdle in her chest. I know how it sounds, he said. I'm asking you to trust me anyway. She glanced at him sideways, at the rigid line of his jaw, the way his hands sat too still in his lap, like a man deliberately keeping them from betraying anything more. It was not the posture of someone lying for sport. It was the posture of someone rationing the truth because the whole of it was too heavy to hand a stranger in a delivery van. She should have pushed him out at the next stop sign. She thought about it, actually turned the idea over while the wipers beat their steady rhythm, and the rain kept coming. And then she thought about her own rule, the one she had broken twice already tonight, just by stopping the van, just by taking the left he told her to take. She thought about the way his hand had gone to his jacket pocket and stopped short of a phone that did not exist. And instead of fear, what rose up in her was something closer to curiosity, sharp and unwise. Where am I taking you? She said, if not the gas station. He gave her an address in a part of the city she did not usually deliver to, blocks of converted warehouses and glass towers where the streetlights looked newer and the sidewalks looked swept. She drove there in a silence that was not quite comfortable and not quite hostile, aware the whole time of his phone buzzing over and over from somewhere inside his jacket, a phone he had told her, not 20 minutes ago, was dead. He did not answer it. He watched the mirrors instead, and once, at a red light, she caught him glancing at the strip of paper receipts clipped to her visor, her delivery route for the night, printed with addresses and times, and something crossed his face that looked almost like calculation before he looked away. When they reached the building, glass and steel rising up out of the rain like something from a different city entirely, he did not get out right away. He reached into his jacket, and for one unsteady second, Mercy's whole body went tight, and then he only produced a plain white card, no name on it, just a string of numbers along the bottom edge. If something feels wrong in the next few days, he said, call this number. Don't wait to be sure. Just call. Wrong how? I hope you never find out, he said, and there was something almost gentle underneath the strangeness of it, an apology folded into a warning. He stepped out into the rain, and by the time she leaned across the seat to ask him one more question, he was already gone, swallowed by the lobby doors, and she was left holding a blank card and 4 deliveries that were now badly late. She sat there a moment longer than she needed to, engine idling, watching the lobby doors settle back into stillness, and told herself, the sensible thing, the thing she would have said to anyone else in her position, that a stranger's fear was not her responsibility, and a blank card was not an invitation to anything. Her deliveries were already 40 minutes behind schedule, and Ronnie's texts had turned from irritated to genuinely worried, 3 messages in a row asking if she was all right, which was as close as he ever came to admitting he cared whether she made it home in one piece. She answered him quickly, told him the truth in the smallest possible version. Flat tire, all fine now, and pulled back out into the rain with the white card tucked into her cup holder, where she could see it at every red light for the rest of the night. She told herself, driving away, that it was nothing, a stranger's paranoia bleeding onto a stranger's night. She almost believed it until she checked her phone at the next red light and found a text from her landlord, sent 11 minutes ago, asking why a payment from an unfamiliar account had just cleared her overdue balance in full. She had not sent any payment. She had no idea, sitting there with the rain drumming on the roof and the card still damp in her hand, that the man she had just driven home was not lost at all, that he had chosen her street on purpose, out of every quiet, forgettable route in the city, because it belonged to a woman he had decided, before he ever knocked on her window, that no one would think to look for. The knock came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that did not match the soft, apologetic way most people announced themselves at her door. Mercy had just gotten out of the shower, hair still dripping down the collar of an old sweatshirt, and for a moment she stood frozen in her kitchen, listening, half convinced she had imagined it. The knock came again, harder. Her phone had been buzzing on and off for the better part of an hour before the knock came, her mother's ringtone twice, unanswered. Because Mercy had spent the drive home turning the white card over in her mind and had not trusted her own voice yet to sound normal on a call she knew would end with her mother asking, gently, whether everything was really fine, and Mercy saying yes the way she always said yes, whether or not it was true. She had finally silenced the phone and stepped into the shower hoping the hot water would settle the strange, humming unease in her chest. And it had not even a little, so that by the time the 3 sharp knocks landed against her door, she was already braced for something she could not name. She checked the peephole first, another habit she had never managed to unlearn, and there, distorted by the little glass lens, stood Damien, no longer soaked and lost, looking but dry, changed into a dark coat that fit him the way the ruined suit had only hinted at, and beside him, close enough to be deliberate, stood a second man, built like a doorway, hands folded in front of him, eyes already scanning the hallway behind Damien's shoulder. "You," she said, opening the door only as far as the chain allowed. "How do you know where I live?" "I looked at your delivery route," Damien said. "It was clipped to your visor." The honesty of it startled her more than a lie would have. She unhooked the chain, mostly because some instinct told her that a locked door had never once been the thing keeping her safe, and stepped back to let him in, ignoring the way the second man remained outside, positioned like he intended to stay there all night. "You need to explain what's happening," she said, arms crossed, "starting with why my landlord thinks I paid off 6 months of back rent tonight, which I did not do." Something shifted in Damien's face. Not quite guilt, more like the particular discomfort of a man about to reveal only as much truth as necessary. "I paid it," he said. "It seemed like the fastest way to keep you from having to worry about something small while something larger is happening around you. Nothing about 6 months of rent is small." "To me it was," he said, and the plainness of it, no apology, no softening, told her more about the world he came from than any explanation could have. "Start over," she said. "Who are you?" He glanced once toward the door, as if weighing how much of the hallway could hear him, then back at her. "My name is Damien Cross. My family runs an organization most people in this city know by reputation, and try very hard never to know by anything closer than that. Tonight, someone tried to make sure I did not make it home. I was not lost when you found me. I was making sure the car following me lost interest before it found something worth following." The floor did not exactly move under her, but it felt close. A slow tilt of everything she had assumed about the night, rearranging itself around a shape she had not been prepared for. "You used me," she said slowly, "as a decoy." "I used the fact that no one had any reason to be watching you," he said. "That is not the same thing, but I understand why it feels like it right now." "It feels exactly like that thing," she said, "because it is that thing." He did not argue. That, more than anything he had said so far, was what kept her from ordering him out of the apartment. He stood there and let her be angry, let the silence stretch, and when he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its careful control. "There's someone inside my own family who wants me gone," he said. "I don't yet know exactly who is pulling which strings, only that it's close enough that I couldn't risk any car I trust being seen anywhere near where I actually needed to go. A stranger's van, going nowhere important, was the safest thing on the road tonight. I'm telling you this because you deserve to understand what you walked into, not because I think it makes what I did acceptable." Mercy sat down slowly on the arm of her couch, the anger in her chest not gone but crowded now by something colder. "If someone was watching you," she said, "and I drove you halfway across the city in a van with my company's name on the side, then whoever was watching knows what I look like, knows what I drive." "Yes," Damien said, and did not soften that either. "That's why I'm here, instead of asleep. That's why Reyes is outside your door, and will be for as long as it takes me to make sure you're not a loose thread someone decides to pull." The word loose thread landed harder than she expected. A clinical, distancing phrase for what amounted to her entire life, suddenly balanced on the edge of someone else's war. She thought of her mother, 3 states away, calling every Sunday to ask if Mercy needed anything and always hearing no, needing nothing, handling everything, because the one time she had let someone else handle something for her, years ago, it had cost her almost everything she had. She thought of the rent that was somehow, impossibly, no longer overdue. "Who is he?" she asked. tilting her chin toward the hallway. Toward the man built like a doorway who had not moved an inch since she opened the door. "Reyes," Damien said. "He's worked for my family longer than I've been alive. If I trusted anyone with your safety besides myself, it would be him." "That's not really an answer to my question." He studied her for a moment, something calculating, flickering behind the practiced warmth, before he shrugged and let the silence stretch, as if deciding the topic wasn't worth pressing any further tonight. "He's head of my personal security," Damien said. "Which means, as of tonight, if you'll allow it, some of that responsibility extends to you, whether either of us finds that comfortable or not." Mercy looked past him, at the broad, patient shape of a man who had clearly stood outside far more dangerous doors than hers, and felt the unease in her chest curdle into something closer to resentment, at how easily, how completely, her ordinary life had become a line item in someone else's security arrangements. "I want the payment reversed," she said. Damien's eyebrows rose slightly. "It's already processed. Then I'll pay it back to you. I don't want to owe anyone anything, especially not someone who just told me I'm currently useful to a criminal organization." "It's not a criminal organization," he said, evenly. "Not in the way you mean. It's a company, several companies, that happen to operate in spaces where the line between legitimate and otherwise gets drawn differently than it does on Halsted Street. I understand that distinction means very little to you right now." "It means nothing to me right now," she said. "What means something is that 3 hours ago my biggest problem was a maxed-out credit card, and now there's a bodyguard outside my apartment." Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she flinched, badly enough that Damien noticed, his whole posture shifting toward her before he caught himself. It was only her bank, a notification about the cleared balance, but her hands were shaking when she set the phone back down, and she hated that they were. Hated that a stranger in her apartment had noticed it too. "I can have Reyes drive you somewhere safer tonight," Damien said. "A hotel. Somewhere with better security than a 4th-floor walk-up. I'm not leaving my apartment, because your family has a problem you didn't tell me about until you were already inside my home." Something in his expression sharpened, not anger, more like respect he had not expected to feel. "That's fair," he said. "I want to know one thing," she said, "and I want an honest answer, not the version that makes tonight easier for you. Is there anyone specific I should be watching for? A name, a face, anything?" He was quiet long enough that she almost repeated the question, and when he answered, his voice had gone careful again. The same careful it had been in the van when he told her about a broken-down car that had never existed. "There's a name," he said. "I'm not going to give it to you tonight." "Why not?" "Because the moment I say it out loud in your apartment, it becomes a piece of information someone might come looking for you to get. Right now, you're a stranger who gave a man a ride. That's a small thing to explain away. A stranger who knows a name is not small at all." It was, she recognized, the second time in one night that he had chosen to protect her by keeping her in the dark, and the pattern of it, however well-intentioned, sat uneasily beside the growing, complicated pull she felt toward him, toward the low, to steady way he spoke, even when what he said should have frightened her more than it did. She looked at him, standing in her small kitchen, coat still faintly damp at the shoulders, and thought that whatever else he was, he had not once, in either conversation, tried to make the danger sound smaller than it was. "Reyes stays outside," she said finally. "You go home, and tomorrow, you tell me the name." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. "There, and gone. Tomorrow," he agreed, and turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite place. Equal parts caution and something warmer he seemed to be deliberately keeping in check. "For what it's worth," he said, "most people who find out what I do react by asking how much money is involved. You haven't asked me that once. Would you have told me if I had?" "No," he admitted, and this time the almost smile reached all the way to his eyes before he caught himself and let himself out into the hallway. Mercy stood alone in her kitchen for a long while afterward, listening to the low murmur of voices in the hall, Reyes's deep, unhurried tone, and Damien's clipped instructions, until the elevator doors finally closed somewhere down the corridor, and the building settled back into its ordinary late-night quiet. She looked down at the white card, still damp at one corner from the rain hours earlier, and at her phone, where her mother's missed calls sat waiting, unanswered, and understood, with a clarity that unsettled her more than the knock at her door had. that whatever had started on that empty street was only beginning, and that she had no idea yet how much of herself it was going to cost her to see it through. By morning, the name Damien had refused to give her found its own way into her life. His name was Julian, and Mercy learned it not from Damien but from Julian himself, who appeared at the small coffee shop near her apartment complex, with a warmth so immediate and so practiced that she almost mistook it for kindness. "You must be Mercy," he said, sliding into the seat across from her without asking, setting down a coffee she had not ordered and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Damien mentioned you. I wanted to make sure you were doing all right, after everything." "After everything," she repeated carefully. "What exactly did he tell you?" "Enough," Julian said, spinning his own cup slowly between his hands. "My brother isn't always forthcoming, even with family. I like to fill in gaps where I can." He was handsome, in a sharper, more restless way than Damien, quicker to smile, quicker to lean in, and there was something in the eagerness of his questions, disguised as concern, that made the hair rise on the back of Mercy's neck even as she answered them, careful and vague, telling him nothing she had not already decided was safe to say. "It must have been strange," Julian said, "finding a total stranger like that, in the middle of nowhere, in the rain. Did he seem afraid to you? Nervous, maybe, like he was watching for something?" "He seemed lost," Mercy said. "That's really all I noticed." "Of course," Julian said, though his eyes lingered on her a beat too long, the smile never faltering, even as the question underneath it sharpened. "Damien's always been good at seeming exactly whatever a situation requires. It's a family talent, honestly. I used to admire it, before I understood how much of it was calculation." "That sounds like a strange thing to say about your own brother." "We're close," Julian said smoothly. "In the way people raised in the same house are always close, whether or not they'd choose each other otherwise." He leaned back in his chair, studying her over the rim of his cup, and for a moment his easy charm slipped just enough for something colder to show underneath it. There and gone so quickly she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. "You strike me as someone careful," he said. "Someone who notices things. I imagine a job like yours teaches you to remember streets, times, small details. Most people would let slide right past them." "I mostly just try to make my deliveries on time," she said, keeping her voice as light and unremarkable as she could manage, though the comment landed exactly where she suspected he had meant it to, close enough to the manifest folded in her jacket pocket that her pulse ticked up despite herself. He asked about her route that night, which streets, which order, whether she remembered any other cars. "I don't really remember much," she said. "It was raining hard. I was just trying to get him where he needed to go." "Of course," Julian said, and something behind his eyes eased, though whether it was relief or disappointment she could not tell. Before he left, he pressed a card into her hand, his own name printed clearly on it, and told her to call if she ever felt unsafe, as if he had not spent the last 10 minutes trying, gently and expertly, to find out exactly what she knew. She did not call Damien that night to tell him about the meeting. She told herself it was because she needed to think it through first, to be sure of what she had actually noticed before she handed it to a man who had already once decided, on her behalf, what information she could handle. The truth, underneath that reasoning, was older and less comfortable, a habit worn smooth over years of solving her own problems quietly rather than risk being told, again, that her needs were too much for the people around her. Instead of calling him, she poured herself a cup of tea she didn't really want, sat down at her small kitchen table, and pulled out the delivery logs from that night, the same ones Damien had glanced at in her van, and started matching addresses against the route, looking for anything unusual, anything that had felt wrong at the time, and been swallowed by the rain and the rush. She worked through them slowly, cross-referencing stop times against the receipts still crumpled at the bottom of her bag. And around the third pass, her co-worker Denise leaned over the partition between their lockers at the depot, curious. "You've been staring at that clipboard for 20 minutes, Denise said. "Everything all right?" "Just double-checking a delivery," Mercy said, which was not quite a lie, though it was nowhere close to the truth, and Denise, who had known her long enough by now to recognize when a conversation was being politely, deliberately closed, shrugged and let it go. The way people who had long since learned to respect Mercy's stubborn habit of handling things alone always eventually did. It was there, buried in the fourth stop of the night, a warehouse address she had delivered to a dozen times before, that she found it. A shipping manifest, glimpsed only for a second while the receiving clerk signed for the package, listed a company name she recognized from the small print on Julian's card. She sat with the receipt in her hands for a long time after Denise had gone home, turning the coincidence over, telling herself it might mean nothing, that shell companies and shipping names overlapped in this city more often than anyone liked to admit, and not quite believing it, even as she thought it. It proved nothing on its own, but it sat wrong in her stomach all evening, a loose thread she could not stop pulling at. And by the time Damien called that night, voice low and clipped, asking if Julian had reached out to her, she had already decided, without quite admitting it to herself, that she was not ready to tell him everything. He came by the coffee shop, she said. Asked a lot of questions. I didn't tell him anything. What kind of questions? About that night. What I remembered. She hesitated, the manifest sitting folded in her jacket pocket like a stone. Nothing important. There was a pause on the line, long enough that she wondered if he had heard the hesitation underneath her words. If he contacts you again, Damien said, I need to know immediately. Not after you've decided what's worth telling me. You didn't exactly extend me the same courtesy last night, she said. You still haven't told me anything real about what's actually going on, and now you're asking me to hand over everything the second it happens. It's not the same situation. Explain the difference then, she said, sharper than she meant to. Because from where I'm standing, you both seem to have decided that I can be managed instead of informed. You get to decide what I can handle, and I'm supposed to just trust that you know best. And meanwhile, your brother is buying me coffee and asking about my delivery route like it's nothing. Damien's voice, when he answered, had gone very quiet. The particular quiet of a man choosing every word. I'm not trying to control what you know. I'm trying to keep you from becoming a target faster than you already are. I think it might be a little late for that, she said, and hung up before he could ask what she meant. Before she had to explain the manifest folded in her pocket, or the sick, sinking feeling that she had, once again, decided to carry something dangerous alone, rather than risk leaning on someone who might let her down. She did not sleep well that night. Twice, she woke to the sound of a car idling too long outside her building, and both times she told herself it was nothing. The way she had told herself, the rain was nothing, the empty street was nothing, and every small warning sign since had been nothing. Right up until the moment it stopped being nothing at all. The following afternoon, walking back from the corner store with a bag of groceries she barely remembered choosing, she saw the black car again, parked half a block from her building, engine running, exhaust curling into the cold air, though no one appeared to be inside. She had noticed a car matching that description twice already that week, once outside the depot, and once, she thought, though she had talked herself out of it at the time, idling near the coffee shop where she had met Julian, and the third sighting settled any doubt she had left. She stopped walking, groceries suddenly heavy against her hip, and made herself breathe evenly, the way she had trained herself to do years ago, whenever fear threatened to make her decisions for her. Somewhere behind her, a door opened, footsteps too deliberate to belong to a stranger, and when she turned, it was not Julian standing there, but a man she did not recognize, watching her with the flat, professional attention of someone taking inventory rather than a person greeting a neighbor. You dropped something, he said, nodding toward the sidewalk, though nothing lay there at all. His voice pitched, just friendly enough to pass for a neighbor's if anyone else had been close enough to overhear it. Mercy did not stop to see what he wanted her to believe she had dropped. She walked, fast and even, toward the busy corner, 2 blocks up, groceries forgotten against her hip, heart going hard enough that she could feel it in her throat, and did not look back until she was inside the pharmacy on the corner, breathing too quickly, hands shaking around her phone as she finally called Damien's number. He answered before the second ring finished. Mercy. There was a man outside my building, she said, voice unsteady in a way she hated. He said I dropped something. There wasn't anything there. Where are you right now? The pharmacy on Ridge and 4th. Stay inside. Don't go back to your apartment. I'm sending Reyes. He'll be there in 6 minutes. A pause. And when he spoke again, his voice had dropped, quieter, angrier, though not at her. I should have told you the name the first night. I'm sorry. Just tell me now, she said, watching the pharmacy door, watching the street beyond the glass. Whatever you were protecting me from by not telling me, I think it already found me anyway. Reyes arrived in 5 minutes, not 6, and drove her not to her apartment but to a private floor of a building she had only ever seen from the outside. Glass walls looking out over a city that seemed, from this height, almost peaceful, almost unaware of everything moving underneath it. On the ride up, a woman in a sharp gray suit met them at the elevator bank, introduced herself briskly as Priya, Damien's chief of staff, and walked beside Mercy the rest of the way, with the calm, efficient warmth of someone used to steadying people who had just been dropped into the middle of a crisis they never asked for. "He's been pacing since your call," Priya said quietly, as if sharing a secret she wasn't entirely supposed to share. "I haven't seen him like that in a long time." Damien was waiting when the elevator opened, and for the first time since the rain-soaked street where she had first seen him, his composure had cracked, something raw and unguarded showing through before he caught it and smoothed it away. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the coffee shop onward. Don't leave anything out this time." She told him, the manifest, the company name, the man outside her building, and watched his face change as the pieces settled into a shape he clearly recognized, his jaw tightening, one hand curling into a fist against the glass table between them, before he forced it open again. "That shipping company," he said slowly, "is a shell. Julian set it up 18 months ago, under a name close enough to one of our legitimate subsidiaries that no one thought to look twice. I've been trying to trace where money was leaving the organization for almost a year. I assumed it was an outside threat." He looked up at her, and something in his expression had gone very still, very careful, the look of a man about to say something he had been avoiding. "I didn't assume it was Julian, because I didn't want it to be." Priya, standing near the doorway with a tablet still in hand, cleared her throat gently. "Damien, if this is what I think it is, legal needs to be looped in before anything else happens. Not after." "I know," Damien said, not looking away from Mercy. "Give us the room, Priya." 5 minutes. She hesitated, glanced once at Mercy as if silently checking whether she wanted an ally left in the room. And when Mercy gave the smallest nod that she was all right, Priya stepped out and pulled the glass door closed behind her, leaving the two of them alone with the weight of what he had just admitted. "Why would he do this?" Mercy said. "Steal from his own family." "Because our father chose me to run things 8 years ago, and Julian has spent every year since convinced it was a mistake he could still correct if he found the right leverage. He's not stupid. He knew that draining the company slowly, quietly, would eventually be traced back to whoever controlled that shell account. I think he panicked when internal audits started closing in, and decided the fastest way out was to make sure I wasn't around to finish the investigation." "How does someone even hide that much money without anyone noticing?" Mercy asked. "You said audits had been running for a year." "Slowly," Damien said. "A few percent skimmed off logistics contracts here, a padded invoice there, routed through a shipping company with a name close enough to one of ours that nobody double-checked the paperwork. It's the kind of theft that only works if the person doing it understands exactly how the real company operates, which side of it nobody watches closely. Julian grew up inside this business the same as I did. He knew precisely where to look. The car that night," Mercy said, "the one that followed us, was his," Damien said. "I know that now. I didn't want to believe it while I was sitting in your van telling myself it might be anyone." The confession, when it came, arrived almost sideways, folded into the middle of an explanation about routes and safe houses, and it took Mercy a moment to understand what he had actually admitted. "Wait," she said. "You said you didn't want to believe it while you were sitting in my van. That means you already suspected him before that night. Which means you weren't just avoiding a car that happened to be following you." Damien's silence answered before he did. "I'd had Reyes flag unusual movement near my usual routes for 2 weeks, he said finally. "That night, I knew something was wrong before I ever stepped out of my car. I chose to abandon it 3 blocks from your street on purpose. And I chose your street specifically, out of a dozen possible directions, because I'd seen your delivery route before. Regular, unremarkable, nowhere Julian's people would think to look for me. I didn't wander into you by accident, Mercy. I looked for exactly the kind of stranger you were." The floor tilted again, the way it had the first night, only worse this time, because this was not a stranger's secret being revealed to her. It was the shape of every choice he had made since the moment their eyes met through a rain-streaked window. "So the lost act," she said slowly. "The broken-down car. All of it was already decided before you ever knocked on my window. Yes, he said, and did not look away from her while he said it, which somehow made it worse, not better. You didn't choose me, she said. You used the fact that no one would notice me. That's not the same as trusting a stranger. That's calculating that I was disposable enough to be useful. That's not how I meant it. It doesn't matter how you meant it, she said, standing now, her voice rising in a way that surprised her. It matters what you did. You made a decision that put my entire life at risk, and you made it before we ever spoke a single word to each other. Every conversation since then, every apology, every card telling me to call if something felt wrong, all of it came after you'd already decided I was worth spending. If it came to that, I would never have let it come to that. You don't get to promise me that, she said. You didn't ask. That's the whole problem, Damien. You never asked. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing that, the muscle in his jaw working the way it did when he was choosing his next words with more care than usual. Would you have said yes? He asked, quiet. If I had, I don't know, she said honestly, and meant it, unwilling to hand him a comfortable answer just to smooth over the tension between them. Maybe not, but that was never your decision to make for me. You took that choice away from me the same way Julian's people are trying to take away my sense of safety in my own neighborhood. And I don't think you see how those two things rhyme. They're not the same, Damien said, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. They're closer than you want to admit, she said. You both decided what I could handle without asking me. The only difference is you're telling yourself it was for my own good, wasn't it? Maybe, she said. But good intentions don't change what it felt like on my end, standing in a rainstorm with no idea I'd already been chosen for something. He crossed the room toward her, stopping close enough that she could see the exhaustion behind the careful control, the toll of a man who had spent the last 2 days trying to solve a war inside his own family while also trying, badly, to protect someone he had pulled into it without permission. You're right, he said. I made a choice for you. The same way I've made every choice in this organization for 8 years, alone. Because I learned a long time ago that the moment you let someone else in, you hand them the ability to destroy you. My mother trusted the wrong person once. It cost her everything, including, eventually, her life. I built my entire life around never making that mistake, and then I made a version of it anyway, just aimed at you, instead of me. The admission landed harder than his apology had, because it was not an excuse, it was an explanation, and it lined up too neatly with the same fear she had spent years building her own walls around. That doesn't make it right, she said, quieter now. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Her phone buzzed then, sharp in the quiet room. A text from an unknown number. 4 words, long. We need to talk. Below it, an address she did not recognize, somewhere near the warehouse district, close to the shipping company whose name had started all of this. Damien read it over her shoulder, his whole body going still. Don't respond, he said. That's Julian. He knows you have the manifest, or he suspects you do, and he's trying to draw you out before I can move against him. So what happens now? Now, Damien said, and something in his voice had shifted. Grief and fury and resolve tangled together. I stopped protecting him from the consequences of what he's done, and I stopped deciding, on my own, what you're allowed to be part of. If you're willing, I want your help finishing what you already started. Not because it's safe, because you're the only person who's seen the piece of evidence that actually proves it was him, and not some outside threat. And because I think you deserve the chance to end this on your own terms instead of mine. Mercy looked at the message glowing on her phone, at the address that would put her back on a street, not unlike the one where all of this had begun, and felt the old, familiar instinct rise up in her, the one that told her to handle it alone, to protect everyone else from the danger by carrying it herself. She thought of the rent, quietly paid off without her permission, of Julian's easy, practiced smile in the coffee shop, of Damien standing in front of her now, finally, asking instead of deciding. What happens to him? She asked. Once you have everything you need, that depends on how much he's willing to admit, Damien said. If he cooperates, the board handles it quietly. He loses everything, but keeps his freedom. If he doesn't, it becomes a police matter, and there won't be anything quiet about it at all. I don't know yet which version he'll choose. I don't think he knows either. And if he doesn't cooperate, Mercy asked, does that put me in more danger or less? Less, eventually, Damien said. Once he's removed from any position of power, there's no strategic reason left for him to come after you. The danger right now exists because he still has something to protect. Once that's gone, so is his motive. That's a colder kind of comfort than I expected, she said. It's the honest kind, Damien said, holding her gaze steadily. I promised myself, after everything, that I wouldn't give you any other kind again. I'm not doing this so you can protect me, she said. I'm doing it because it's mine to finish too. Then we finish it together, Damien said, and reached for his phone to call Reyes, the two of them already moving toward the door before either had said another word, the city outside the glass walls suddenly feeling much closer, much sharper, than it had a few minutes before. The warehouse Julian had chosen sat at the edge of the district Mercy knew best, close enough to her old delivery route that she recognized the cracked loading dock and the flickering security light before Reyes had even fully stopped the car. Damien went in first, insisting, and for once Mercy let him, not because she believed she needed protecting, but because she understood, watching his jaw set in the dim light, that this confrontation belonged to him, in ways hers did not. Julian was waiting inside, alone, except for a single associate who peeled away toward the shadows the moment Damien stepped through the door, as if even Julian's own people had begun to sense which way the ground was shifting. He did not look surprised to see his brother. He looked, if anything, relieved. The particular relief of a man tired of holding a secret together with both hands. I wondered how long it would take, Julian said, before you started pulling the right threads. You had 2 weeks of audits pointing straight at that shell account, Damien said, and instead of coming to me, you tried to have me killed on a public street. I tried to have you delayed, Julian said, though the correction sounded thin even to Mercy's ears. I needed time. You were 3 days from freezing every account tied to that division, and once you did, there'd have been no way to move the money before the board saw exactly what I'd done. So your solution was to put a hit on your own brother. My solution, Julian said, voice cracking for the first time, was to survive being erased the same way you erased me 8 years ago, when Dad chose you to run everything and told me, to my face, that I wasn't built for the weight of it. I have spent 8 years proving him wrong in the only way that was left to me. You could have come to me, Damien said. Whatever you think I am, I never once tried to push you further out than Dad already had. You didn't have to push, Julian said. You just had to exist, better at all of it than I ever was, and let everyone around us notice the difference without you saying a word. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Watching someone else make it look effortless, year after year, while you're drowning, trying to prove you belong in the same room. I know what it did to you, Damien said, gesturing, without quite meaning to, toward Mercy, because it nearly got an innocent woman killed on a street that had nothing to do with either of us. By stealing from the company instead of building something of your own, Damien said. By nearly getting an innocent woman killed because she happened to be standing on the wrong street at the wrong time. Julian's eyes moved to Mercy then, and something colder moved behind them. Calculation, instead of grief. She wasn't supposed to be part of this, he said. If she hadn't kept the manifest, if she'd just told me the truth in that coffee shop, none of this would have escalated the way it has. That's not her fault, Damien said, stepping between them without seeming to notice he had done it. It's yours. Every part of it. Careful, Julian said quietly, and reached into his coat. Not fast, not dramatic. Simply the slow motion of a man who had already decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that there was no version of tonight where he walked out of it with everything intact. The gun he drew was not aimed yet, held loose at his side, but the sight of it sent the room into a different kind of stillness, and Mercy felt her pulse slam hard against her throat. You're not going to use that, Damien said, though his voice had lost its certainty. I don't know what I'm going to do, Julian said, and for a moment he sounded younger than either of them, lost in a way that had nothing to do with acting. I've spent so long telling myself there was a way out of this that didn't end with everyone knowing exactly how far I fell. I don't think there is one anymore. Mercy stepped forward before she had fully decided to, some instinct older than fear, pushing her past the point where staying quiet felt possible. There's a way out that doesn't end with you shooting your own brother, she said. Julian's eyes cut to her, startled. You've already lost the company. You know that. But you haven't lost everything yet. And pulling that trigger is the one thing that would actually make sure you do. You don't even know what you'd be walking back into, Julian said, though his voice had gone unsteady, the gun trembling slightly at his side. Prison, disgrace, Dad's face every time he looks at me for the rest of his life. You're asking me to choose that over just ending it here. I'm asking you to choose being alive over being right, Mercy said. Those aren't the same thing, and I think some part of you already knows that, or you'd have used that gun the second you pulled it out instead of standing here explaining yourself to a woman you tried to have killed 3 weeks ago. Something in Julian's face cracked at that, the calculation finally giving way to something raw underneath it. Exhaustion, maybe, or the particular grief of a man who had spent years building a version of himself he could no longer stand behind. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Julian's shoulders dropped, the gun lowering with them, not surrendered so much as simply too heavy to keep holding up. And Reyes crossed the room fast and quiet, taking the weapon from his slack hand, before Julian had fully decided to let it go. It was not a clean victory. Julian did not apologize, did not weep, only stood there, hollowed out, while Reyes led him toward the door and the security team Damien had waiting outside. And Mercy understood, watching him go, that this was not the kind of ending where the villain paid instantly and completely. It was only the beginning of a much longer, much quieter reckoning that would play out in boardrooms and courtrooms, far from this warehouse. The manifest turned out to be only half of what was needed. In the days that followed, it was Mercy's memory, sharpened by years of a job that required her to notice license plates and cross streets and delivery windows without thinking twice about it, that filled in the rest. She sat across from Damien's legal team, a small, tired-looking group led by a sharp-eyed attorney named Coleman, who did not bother hiding his skepticism the first time Mercy walked into the conference room. No offense, Coleman said, but corroborating testimony from a delivery driver isn't exactly the kind of evidence that holds up against a legal team as expensive as the one Julian Cross can afford. Then let her talk before you decide that, Damien said, and Coleman, after a long look at his employer, gestured for Mercy to begin. She recited addresses, dates, the exact order of stops on the night everything started, and watched Coleman's skepticism shift, slowly, into something closer to attention, as piece after piece of Julian's shell operation came into focus because of details she had almost dismissed as unimportant. A delivery window that didn't match a signed manifest, a receiving clerk's initials that appeared on paperwork for a shipment Julian had sworn, under oath, he'd never authorized. It was not luck that solved it, and it was not Damien's money or power either. It was the ordinary, overlooked skill of a woman who had spent years paying close attention because her life had taught her that no one else would. And by the end of the second afternoon, even Coleman admitted, grudgingly, that her testimony had turned a shaky case into a solid one. The first attempt at a resolution collapsed almost immediately. Julian's lawyer produced a technicality, an argument that the manifest had been obtained without proper authorization, and for 2 tense days it looked as though the entire case might unravel before it reached the board that would decide his fate. Mercy watched Damien pace his office late into the night, more rattled by the setback than she had seen him since the warehouse, and when he finally sat down across from her, defeated in a way that did not suit him, she found herself reaching for his hand before she had decided to. "We'll find another way," she said. "You didn't build all of this on one piece of evidence. You built it on everything, and I still remember everything." "There has to be something else," Damien said, pacing the length of his office that first tense evening, jacket discarded over a chair, sleeves pushed up in a way that made him look less like the head of an empire, and more like a man simply out of good options. "Some record we haven't pulled yet." "There's the depot's own delivery archive," Mercy said slowly, thinking it through as she said it. "Every signature gets logged with a timestamp, not just the manifest copies the clients keep. If Julian's shell company received a shipment on a date he swore he was out of the country, the depot's internal system would still have the original signature, independent of anything his side could have altered." Coleman, who had been quiet in the corner reviewing files, looked up sharply. "That's not something we'd have thought to request. Would your old employer even release that?" "They will if I ask," Mercy said. "I still know the manager there. He owes me a favor from a shift I covered for him 2 winters ago. It took another day, and that second document, an old delivery signature buried in company records that placed the shell account's first payment on a date Julian had claimed, under oath, He was out of the country before the technicality lost its teeth and the case moved forward again. It was not clean or instant. It was work, careful and slow, built out of Mercy's memory and Damien's records and Ray's quiet, thorough digging. And when it finally held, Damien let out a breath that sounded like the first easy one he'd taken in weeks. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the warehouse, when Damien showed up at her apartment without Reyes, without a coat that cost more than her monthly rent, dressed instead in a plain sweater that made him look, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man rather than an institution. "I owe you an apology that isn't wrapped inside an explanation," he said, standing in her doorway. "Not the version where I tell you why I made the choice, just the part where I made it, and it was wrong, and you had every right to be angry about it." "That's a start," Mercy said, arms crossed, though there was less heat in it than there had been in the glass office weeks ago. "I've spent 8 years believing that letting someone in was the same thing as handing them a weapon against me," he said. "I watched what happened to my mother, and I decided the only way to survive this life was to never again let anyone close enough to matter that much. And then I met you on a street I chose because I thought you didn't matter enough to be a risk. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks, that turned into the opposite problem entirely. You matter enough that the idea of losing you the way I almost did outside that pharmacy still wakes me up at night." "You could have asked me," she said, quieter now, "instead of deciding for me. That's still the thing I can't get past, Damien. Not the danger, the not asking." "I know," he said, "so I'm asking now. Whatever this is, whatever it could be, I don't want to build it the way I've built everything else, by deciding first and explaining later. I want to ask you if you're willing to let it be something, even after everything I got wrong at the start." Mercy studied him for a long moment, the rain-soaked stranger who had turned out to be neither lost nor honest that first night, and the man standing in her doorway now, stripped of the coat and the careful distance, asking instead of deciding for the first time since she'd known him. She thought of her own instinct to carry everything alone, the manifest she had kept from him out of habit rather than strategy, and understood that his mistake and hers had grown from the same soil, a shared, stubborn belief that trusting someone else with the truth was the fastest way to lose control of it. "What happened to Julian?" she asked, before she let herself answer, needing to know before she could fully let go of the last 3 weeks. "The board voted to remove him this morning," Damien said. "There will be a criminal case too, eventually, though his lawyers will drag it out as long as they can. He won't run anything again. I made sure of that, and for once I didn't do it alone. I did it with a legal team and a board and a set of records solid enough that nobody could call it a family feud instead of what it actually was." "Do you feel better?" she asked, "now that it's over?" "Some," Damien admitted. "Mostly I feel tired in a way I don't think sleep is going to fix quickly. And grateful, more than I know how to say, that you're standing here able to ask me that question at all." "What about your father?" she asked. "Has he said anything?" "He called this morning," Damien said. "First time in almost a year he's called just to talk, instead of to check on the business. He didn't say much, just that he was sorry it took losing one son to appreciate the one who stayed." He shook his head slightly, as if still working through what that meant. "It's not closure, exactly, but it's more than I expected." "Ask me properly then," she said. "Not a card with a phone number on it. An actual question." A small, real smile broke across his face, the first one she had seen that had nothing careful in it at all. "Mercy Calloway," he said, "would you let me take you somewhere that isn't a gas station, isn't a glass office, and doesn't involve either of us pretending to be lost?" She let herself smile, fully. The first unguarded smile she'd allowed herself since the night he'd climbed into her van, soaked through and lying about a broken-down car. "Yes," she said, and for the first time since a rain-soaked street had upended her entire life, the word came without hesitation, without the old instinct to keep her guard raised against the risk of needing someone. Outside her window, the city had gone quiet in the ordinary way of any Tuesday night. No black cars idling at the curb, no strangers waiting in the rain. Only the two of them standing in a doorway that finally, felt like the beginning of something chosen rather than calculated.